Okay, Professor Andrew Russell. We're now here discussing some advice to give to the students on their essays. So we're going to kick off with the question on geography. So can you fire away with some thoughts on that?
Okay, so the question on electoral geography asks explicitly about Dunleavy's criticism of the standard electoral geography explanation, that somehow voters kind of voters catch regional autonomous cultures, and Dunleavy says that geographers need to come up with a better way of explaining this contagion from voter to voter, rather than just simply rubbing shoulders in the street. There has to be some political context to it. I'd expect good answers for this question to critically engage with the literature on electoral geography, and that means looking at the kind of the models of geographic contagion, the models of context versus the models of composition, and you could epitomise that by looking at the work of Ron Johnston on the contextual side and looking at Ian McAllister on the contagion side. Essays might look at the growth of electoral geography accounts in the 1980s, and you might see that for instance, that they come at a time when Britain is polarised politically. So there's a big gap between winners and losers. There's a big gap between rich and poor. There's a big gap in the economic development of Britain, and that's replicated in voting patterns too. And so what we might be tempted to see, is that as explanations of voting according to class are in decline, something fills the gap, some demographic fills the gap, and that might be geography. In fact, that's the essence of Bill Miller's paradox, because he says that as class is less important at the individual level, at the aggregate level, where a person lives can be quite effective as a predictive tool, because you look at the class characteristic of that constituency to get quite a lot of explanatory purchase on it. I suppose one of the interesting things about the electoral geography debate is that even though most people believe that there is evidence of some regional autonomous cleavage, some of the criticisms made by McAllister do seem to have hit home, and actually the newer electoral geography accounts talk about smaller geographies being more important than larger geographies, and which is one of the criticisms that McAllister made in the first place. So we're less likely to talk about a north-south split and more about it might be being in the northwest rather than northeast. It might be being in Manchester rather than Liverpool. It might be being in South Manchester rather than North Manchester. It might be about being in Didsbury rather than the rest of Manchester. It might be about being in East Didsbury rather than West Didsbury. It might be about, well, this street tends to send their kids to this school. And if you're down to that really small level, then you might ask, well, how real is that level of geographic context? Does it mean anything to voters themselves? I'd expect good essays to engage with that, as well as to sort of make some connection to voting patterns and the ways in which political parties now campaign using local agendas, albeit using national templates.